Good evening. Welcome to this special edition of The Road to City Hall for Wednesday, July 10th, 2013. I'm Errol Lewis. We've got 62 days to go until the city primaries on September 10th. And tonight we are holding the first televised debate between the three Republican candidates for mayor. The next 60 minutes will be an uninterrupted showdown where we hope to talk about issues and learn more about the candidates. They are, in alphabetical order, Joe Lhota, the former deputy mayor and former chairman of the MTA, businessman John Catsimatidis, and George McDonald, who is the founder and president of the Doe Fund. Now, here are the rules. The candidates will have 1 minute to respond to questions that I ask to them. They'll also be given the opportunity to respond if they are addressed directly by one of the challengers. We'll also have what we call a cross-examination, where each candidate will be able to ask one of his opponents a question. And there will, of course, be a lightning round in the middle of the debate in which candidates will only be allowed to answer yes or no to each question. Let me now start with the questioning, and thank you, gentlemen, for coming in tonight. If elected mayor, there is a good chance that you would take office on January 1st with a police department that includes an inspector general, very possibly a court-appointed monitor, and perhaps even a law aimed at preventing racial profiling. All of you have decried those outcomes and condemned recent city council votes. But how will you adjust, and how would you keep the city safe if those changes are indeed in place when you take office? Let's start with you, Mr. Lhota.
Well, Errol, thank you, and I want to thank New York One, and I want to thank all of the viewers at home for the opportunity to be here. You know, the Community Safety Act, which was passed approximately 2 weeks ago, is probably the most misnamed piece of legislation I've ever heard. It's going to make New York unsafe. You know, the Inspector General, as we've all said, is unnecessary. What they want to do about racial profiling is almost outrageous. You will not be able to use any preference group whatsoever in describing an assailant at all, whether it's preference group being the gender, their sex, the color of their skin, or even if they were disabled. So that, you know, if I attacked John, all you could say it was a bald guy, period, amen, and not even say guy. It's really unfortunate. Here's what I'll do as mayor. As mayor, I will do everything I can to provide the resources for the police department to do their job. First and foremost, to keep the city as safe as possible. We've seen over the last 20 years a significant reduction in crime. I want to see crime to continue to go down. And so, you know, we'll be able to work with the IG. Don't forget, that IG is going to work for me as mayor. That IG, and the way that legislation works, that IG is not independent. That IG works for the mayor, and I'll make sure that that IG does what I want the IG to do. And as far as the racial profiling issues are concerned in that legislation, if it passes and if it's not overridden, I will try to find a way to go to court and find it violating some portion of our Constitution.
Okay, Mr. Catsimatidis.
I believe that I'll do whatever's possible to support our police department, and my priority is to keep our city safe. And if required to have an IG, we will have the IG. But I'll do everything possible to limit his authority and to keep our police commissioner's authority at the highest level. And if we pick up the right police commissioner, then it shouldn't be a problem.
Mr. McDonald.
I think the politicalization of the police department in this election disqualifies the people who are doing it, actually, to be mayor of the city of New York. We have a problem with young men 18 to 25 years old. 20% of the young men 18 to 25 years old in our city are not going to school and unemployed. Now, I was out in Brighton Beach at a forum the other night, and I was walking on the boardwalk, and I encountered a young man who was 20 years old, and he gave my campaign speech to me. He said, if you want to stop worrying about throwing people up against a wall with stop, question, and frisk, you should help us get jobs. And that's the answer to solving the last frontier in our city of crime, is employment, getting jobs. That's what we should be concentrating on. If we do that, we won't have to worry about what these tactics are that we use to keep ourselves safe.
Well, let me push you on that a little bit and ask all of you sort of a follow-up question. At the core of this debate is a complaint that overwhelmingly Black and Latino young men are being stopped by police an overwhelming amount of the time, and that 9 times out of 10 there's no drugs, there's no weapons, there's no warrants, there's nothing at all that they've done, no violation. What would you tell someone like that young man on the boardwalk and other community members who are saying that it's unfair to treat an entire population as if they're criminal? I mean, being unemployed is one thing, being without a degree is one thing, being stopped by police as if you're a murder suspect is something entirely different, right?
Well, of course it is. But the first thing that we have to understand, and I think that gets lost in this debate, is that the police officer is risking their lives for us. So when he observes somebody whose conduct or physical being suggests to him that that person has a weapon, it's his responsibility for his own family to make sure that that person doesn't. And that's the first step in this process, is that that police officer has to be concerned about getting killed himself. And then after that, he's representing us. And we have the safest big city in America. And there's a reason for that, isn't there?
If that officer, Joe Lhota, is wrong 9 times out of 10, does he need retraining or something?
The 9 times out of 10 is the fact that an officer who follows the Supreme Court ruling Terry v. Ohio, which goes even beyond what George says, if an officer observes someone who's having any suspicious activity, they have the right. It's not a violation of the Fourth Amendment. They have a right to stop anybody. If in fact, when they stop them and they thought that suspicious activity turned up being nothing, that is not illegal. That is not a violation of our Constitution. And so the idea that 9/10 of the time nothing is found, it's not that nothing is found is the issue. The issue is, what exactly did the police officer think was suspicious? And they write it down on the forms, on the 250 forms. And that's what this debate is all about, making sure that we're following the Constitution. And we'll know soon enough when the courts here, the federal courts here in New York, give our ruling.
And Mr. Katsimatides, on many of those 250 forms, furtive movement it stands out as one of these categories, as the reason that someone was stopped. That, in some ways, is going to probably figure prominently in whatever it is the federal court rules. What's your take on that, and whether or not police need to be maybe trained differently?
I believe that we should train our police even more than they have. We can't throw rookie cops into situations where they're going to have to make decisions that more senior police officers have to do. I've also suggested using the 21st century technology. And until we get to that 21st century technology, I don't understand why some of our police officers don't have those magic wands so they don't have to actually frisk, and just like the airports. You just go over the suspect and you don't have to frisk him, and you find out if he has a loaded gun.
Stop, question, and frisk, though, John, is not about guns. Stop, question, and frisk goes far beyond the idea that they think a suspect has a gun. So using some kind of a metal detector or the 21st century technology you're talking about doesn't do anything towards the issue, because most of the stops have nothing to do with guns.
Yeah. But in addition, where people actually complain, Joe, is when they're actually touched in several places, and they get upset about it. And I've talked about the 21st century technology, where you're going to have another piece of machinery that you aim it at the person, and you can tell if he has a... And we have to get to 21st century technology. It might take us
21st century
another
technology
year or
is a
two.
job. If we get these young people jobs, if we help educate them,
I know
they won't be on the street corner. They won't have to use anything to see whether or not they have anything, because they won't be there. And that's the whole point of this discussion. If we have all of these politicians start talking about how we can employ and educate the youth of our city, we won't be having these discussions, Earl.
We're going to have
Me and Joe decided we're going to put you in charge of homeless.
We are going to get to...
John, you make more demeaning comments in these forums.
I apologize.
Well, you must spend all of your days
But you
apologizing.
do a terrific
You must
job.
spend all
No,
of
I
your...
don't.
I don't need you
I think
to
you do
tell
a
me what
terrific
kind of a
job
job
on the
I'm
homeless.
doing. I'll do a terrific job as mayor of the city
I
of
think
New
you
York.
do a terrific job on homeless.
Okay, gentlemen, we are going to get to jobs and the economy as a separate section in just a couple of minutes. Right now, though, I want to ask you a political question. And if elected, one of you would become pretty much automatically the most powerful and certainly the most high-profile Republican in New York. And you've got a party that's been coping with scandals, with low voter enrollment. In your role as party leader, or as the leading representative of the Republican Party, what would you do to sort of help fix the party? Let's start with you.
Well, as you know, I changed my registration after 45 years of being a Democrat to be a Republican a year ago, this coming August. I believe that in New York City, that the voters are looking for a person to elect and not a party. And I think that the history of our elected officials points that out. So while I am a Republican, I believe in the economic message of the Republican Party, work over welfare, those type of things that I've spent the past 25 years actually working with people doing, climbing the economic ladder, giving opportunity for people at the bottom. But when I'm mayor, I want to be mayor of all of the people. I don't want to represent a political party. I want to represent all of the people of the city of New York. I don't have any political ambitions, and that's good because the mayor of the city of New York never does go any higher in public life than mayor, which is, I want to be mayor, and I don't want to be a representative of a political party. I want to be a representative of the people of the city of New York who elect me to work on their behalf.
Joe Lhota, I mean, you're, again, de facto party leader, at least for New York City, arguably for New York State, if elected mayor. What do you do for the party?
One of the things that I will do for the party, without any question or doubt, is build the party in New York. Work with the chairman, the state chairman of the Republican Party, to make it bigger. You know, Errol, one of the things you mentioned, all of the corruption-related problems. They've been on both sides of the aisle. And one of the reasons why, and there are more Democrats than Republicans, and you know, in chains. I'm getting so sick and tired of the fact that I'm seeing more and more of our elected officials. It's not uncommon to see them handcuffed walking out of the federal courthouse. And it's way too common. We've had, as I've said before, a tsunami of sleaze in this state. We need to create a real two-party system in this state, one that'll make sure that there's competition, because we've got to keep all of these elected officials, all of us, on their toes to make sure that they realize that they have to serve the people. And I think one of the ways to do that is to have a real two-party system in this state. I'm committed to working with the chairman, not only here in the 5 boroughs, but throughout the state of New York. I think it benefits all of us.
Mr. Katzimatidis.
I'm committed to make it a party of all the people. I go to Harlem all the time. I go to Asian neighborhoods all the time. I go to Russian neighborhoods. I go to Greek neighborhoods. I go to Italian neighborhoods. I represent all the people. And like I've told people, they said to me, oh, why don't you just go into the Republican neighborhoods? Because I am running the November election now. I am running to represent all the people, and I'm not afraid to go in any neighborhood and talking to the people in that neighborhood because I feel their pain.
Let me ask you, for both you and for Mr. McDonald, who have changed parties, was that a matter of convenience, or is there something, core values about the party that have attracted you to the Republican line?
Certainly, the economic message of work over welfare. Look, we have in New York City this right to shelter, for example, and everybody thinks that New York taxpayers can afford to house anybody who comes here from America because we have to do that because of this right to shelter. Well, I'm opposed to that. I think that we ought to have some qualifications for people who come here for housing. The Speaker of the Council wants to give a permanent rental subsidy to everybody. So 20% of the people in the shelter system, last known address, are from someplace else. So the taxpayers of the city of New York have to pay for that. I'm opposed to that. There are things like that, thing after thing after thing. So issue after issue after issue. So small businesses, the laws that the city council has been passing are the antithesis of attracting small business. Those kinds of things, economic message, make me a Republican. Now, as I say, in the city of New York, the day after I'm elected mayor, we get beyond the party politics because it's not about that. It's about what's in the best interest of the people who elect you.
Mr. Katzimatidis.
Well, I'm running as a Republican liberal. I have always been pro-people. I believe that our elderly have to be taken care of. Whatever we promised our elderly, we have to deliver, not like some of the national Republicans. I've worked for the Police Athletic League for 28 years. We have to take care of our youth. We have to take care of the kids and give them hope and give them opportunity. And that's what I plan to do. I've always been pro-business. I believe that the business community has to do well for the rest of the community to do well. For 20 years, 30 years, I've always supported our law enforcement. So, pro-business, pro-law enforcement, Republican, liberal, as far as helping our elderly, and and helping our youth. And that's what a real Republican should be in the Northeast.
And Joe Lhota, I mean, different version of the question. You didn't change your party affiliation. On the other hand, you're trying to create a third party line, or I guess even a fourth party line, right? You've got the Conservative Party endorsement, and you're also going to create some new party line.
Right.
Why isn't it good enough to just be a Republican?
What's the reality is the enrollment here in the city, there are a lot more Democrats than there are Republicans, and there are some Democrats who cannot instinctively allow themselves to vote for someone on the Republican line. So you create a third line, and you give them that opportunity to do it. We've seen that happen all throughout the 20th century here in New York City. Quite honestly, I enjoy the fact that George and John have changed party affiliation to come into the party. We need to make sure that we have a competitive process here in New York, and I welcome the opportunity to debate them, and welcome to the opportunity to let the people of New York make up their mind. I agree with both of them that once you become elected mayor, you're the mayor of all the people, and it is important that you treat everybody fairly, that you treat everybody equitably, and that's the important part of it. Once you're the mayor of the city of New York, you're the CEO of this city, you are in charge and making sure that you're able to uplift the city, make it affordable, provide the affordable housing, keep them safe, keep everybody safe, and really, we need to have reform of our education.
Got to point out, Ronald Reagan was a Democrat, converted to Republican. Rudy Giuliani was a Democrat at one point, converted to Republican. Mike Bloomberg was a Democrat, converted to Republican. Because what I believe, I don't know if he's back or forth.
He's an independent.
What I believe is people have to represent New York and represent what the people of New York want. And real people, real citizens, represent them.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to move on now to the what we call the cross-examination, where you get to ask one of your colleagues a question and they get a chance to respond. Let's start with you, George McDonald.
Mr. Catsimatidis, you're a billionaire and you're used to getting your own way. You've spent a lot of money in this process on county chairman, and you had Vince Tabone, who's a criminal working for you. And you said something on the Curtis Sweela show that I, George McDonald, was going to disappear. Was that a threat?
Please, George. George, we've been friends for 25, 30 years. And I hope
I beg to differ with you about the friendship part. I paid you 11% for 9 years on my mortgage. That doesn't make us friends.
Well, at least you had a mortgage, and at that time you couldn't get a mortgage if you put a gold bar as collateral.
Is that right? Did you get paid, John?
I got paid.
Did you get paid?
George,
but did I sell you a building for $1 million? It's worth $5 million now?
I don't know what it's worth now.
Errol.
Let me say this. I got 8,000 employees. It's very unfortunate what happened to Mr. Tabone. He has a great family. He had a great resume. Anybody would have hired him with that great resume. It was, it wasn't that problem. The problem in politics, as Joe said, is people get greedy in politics sometimes. We need less professional politicians in politics, and we need more successful business, no matter what business they're in. As long as they're successful people and they just want to serve all the people, those are the people that I believe we should attract to run our towns, our cities, our state, and that's the right thing.
And Mr. Catsimatidis.
That sounds like a mafia thing, making me disappear. What is
George,
that? That's the way that the mayor of the city of New York talks about people?
I never said that, George.
Oh, yes, you did.
George,
Okay,
you get one
fine.
question.
Right there.
Just
silly.
Right there.
You're just talking silly.
Listen, to say that you didn't say it right there
just
disqualifies you for being mayor, because it was on the Curtis Sweela show.
George, don't eat up all of your
it.
time, because it'll be taken away from you. Briefly, yes or no? Was that a threat to him?
Absolutely not.
Okay, fine, let's move on. You get to ask somebody a question.
John, Mayor Bloomberg has told us that next year will be a $2 billion deficit, and we're going to have to close it. All three of us have said that we are not going to raise taxes.
Yes.
Can you name three programs or various different departments of the city of New York or agencies that you would cut or eliminate?
What I've said publicly, Joe, and I've said this publicly, that on January 1, when I take over as mayor, what I'm going to do is any taxes that the mayor is responsible for, I will freeze. I will freeze those taxes. I want to take the budget, analyze it, and it could take 90 days, And then at the end of 90 days, when you know all the facts, then the decisions we make.
John, I recommend you start a little bit earlier than that,
We
because
will.
by the end of January, you're
We'll start
required
on
to put out
November
a
5th.
financial. I'll start on November 5th, and I'll talk to you what I should do.
Mr. Katz-Matid has a question for one of your colleagues.
Joe,
John,
how are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Thank you for that question.
The people on Staten Island are angry about their tolls going up. Can you assure them that you will not raise their taxes?
I can absolutely assure them that I won't raise the taxes. I'm the only person at this table who's actually put forward proposals, 3 specific proposals of taxes I want to cut. The tolls were raised. They were raised based on a decision that was made by Governor Patterson, who said that the tolls were going to go up in 2013. They were supposed to go up higher than they did because of what I did at the MTA, because of the fact that they spent less in 2012 than they spent in 2011. The fares and the tolls did not go up as much as they said they should go up in 2009. So you really got to go back and you got to ask Governor Patterson, Speaker Silver, the majority leader at the time in the Senate was Malcolm Smith, who all said publicly, all put in writing, that the fares and tolls would go up in those years. And you know why? Because those men stole money from the people of the city of New York that was dedicated to the MTA. And in the process
Joe,
of doing that...
You're the CEO. The CEO has a lot to say to his board of directors.
Right. Here's the choices.
And you got to look at the amount of transparency you gave your board of directors and how you explained it.
I challenge you, John, to show me what was not transparent at the MTA.
Okay.
That's the most transparent governmental organization in the United States of America. And here's
I'll remember that.
No, you should remember that. The reality is, yes, I was the CEO.
Yes.
Here are your choices. You follow through because they stole money in Albany. These politicians in Albany stole money. And in the process of doing it, you either do one of 2 things. You cut services, which requires you to cut some of the workers and cut services to the people of the city of New York, or you raise the fares. That's the choice. And the reality is, I don't like that decision. I don't like that decision, well, one bit. The reason why I went to the MTA and the reason why I accepted the job from Andrew Cuomo, from Governor Cuomo, is because no one was managing that place in any way, shape, or form from a point of view of the people and the riders. The riders are really the customers. And I agree with you, it is unfair. And the people in Staten Island have absolutely nothing to worry about in me raising taxes. I am going to lower taxes.
Joe, a lot of people are concerned that you could have done more.
Oh, you keep advertising and saying it over and over again, they might believe you, even though it's a lot of horse hockey.
Well, I think we can all agree that we wish the tolls were lower, but let's move on. We've got to talk now about the economy. I know you all have been waiting to do that. New York City's unemployment rate right now is over 8%, which is higher than the national average. If you are elected mayor, what specific steps would you take in the first 100 days to create good jobs for New Yorkers who need them? Let's start with you.
Well, the unemployment rate is 8.3%. For the city, and it's 11.2% in the Bronx, and it's 25% for youth, 18 to 26 years old. Your column in the Daily News picks up right on what it is that I would do, which is use the purchasing power of the city of New York to create jobs. Buy it here, build it here, use it here. We buy billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of stuff. I use applesauce as an example. Why should we be buying applesauce for the Department of Education from China when we grow apples in New York and we can build a factory in the Bronx? Now, the point that the MTA and the very conservative folks say is that price is all that matters. Well, if you pay $1 more for something, then that dollar goes to create a job, a factory, and that person who has that job then pays rent and buys food and all of that, reinvests the money in our local economy. It's worth the extra cost. So I would approach it from that point of view immediately and start to create jobs based on the city of New York's expenditures.
First 100 days, Joe Lhota.
George is absolutely correct. In the first 100 days, we need to find ways to use the purchasing power of the city of New York. But one of the things that the mayor has to do is create an environment that allows the private sector to create jobs. We have a corporate tax structure that actually doesn't tax income, it taxes capital. It's denying entrepreneurs the ability to create jobs in New York. I will, within the first 100 days, if not within the first day, send to Albany a request that we eliminate that portion of the corporate tax that you don't tax income, but you tax capital. We need to create jobs in the city of New York. We need to create an environment that allows young people, who are the most entrepreneurial bunch that I have ever met in my life, in the high technology area, in the new food processing area that's happening, the growth in Brooklyn, our own borough, when you see all of the food products that are being made. You talk to each and every one of them. They are so concerned that they can't hire people because the fear that they have that they're going to be fined by the city of New York, that they're under siege, that they're small businesses that want to be big businesses, and the city of New York is in their way for allowing them to do that. I will review each and every one of the regulations we have in the city of New York to make sure that they are extremely business friendly. And also, we've got to look at job training, and we also have to look at ways in which we can get our children educated to a point that they're capable of doing all of these various jobs.
Okay, John Katzimatidis.
Well, I agree with Joe. Number one priority, reduce regulations so people have the ability to again invest in New York. Promote small businesses. There's a lot of people around that don't want to open up a small business in New York because they're over-regulated. The fees and the regulations to open up that business becomes ridiculous. There's two plans. There's the short-range plan of creating jobs by instilling confidence, and the long-range plan of bringing in different industries and bringing in different forms of jobs. I've promoted the World's Fair for many times, which is going to create tens of thousands of jobs. I'm the only one of all the mayoral candidates that have actually created tens of thousands of jobs. And we have a plan.
True.
Let me ask a question to everyone at the table, which is, what do you think of tax incentives and other sweeteners as a way to improve the business climate in New York? And do you worry about placing the city in a race to the bottom with other jurisdictions where the economic activity never catches up with the benefits that have been given away?
I believe in incentives, but you need to make it look like a return on investment. In the past, when mayors have given incentives, going back to the Koch era and all the way through to today, there's no follow-up. A company says, if a company is getting certain tax deductions or the abatements that they're given, and they say they're going to create X thousands of jobs. When they don't create those X thousands of jobs, why don't those agreements, those contracts that they were given, have a clawback provision and say, you know what, that money that we gave you, we should have it back. But we do need to have incentives. We can't make ourselves uncompetitive. You know, we've got the governor of Texas coming to New York, wooing our businesses, laughing at us because of our tax structure. We've got to become competitive, or we will lose jobs.
I've talked about increasing our high-paying jobs. We want more high-paying jobs in the city. We want all the kids that are graduating our colleges, our universities, to stay in the city. I've talked about Silicon Alley, bringing in internet companies, biotech companies that pay $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year and not $8 an hour. We want those people, those graduates that are actually graduating, they want to stay in the city, but there's no jobs. So bringing in those companies, I believe in tax incentives, but we got to bring in companies that are creating new jobs, not taking jobs away from existing companies. We run into situations where we're offering tax incentives to companies that come in that take away from existing companies, which is wrong. New companies, new jobs, I believe in tax incentives for those.
You know, John talks about the World's Fair. The next opportunity to have that is 2022. So it's a little ways down the road. And also, John, you know, has said in the past that the recession was a hiccup in New York. And to the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who have lost their jobs and are permanently unemployed because of the recession, I think that's another thing that disqualifies him from being mayor of the city of New York. He says he wants to represent all of the people, but he doesn't understand that hundreds of thousands of people have lost their jobs. They're still unemployed. They need help. We need to help the people from the bottom. He says he's created tens of thousands of jobs, but if you look at the New York Post today, there's some controversy over whether or not he's actually wanted to pay the people who work for him. The judge and the appellate...
Let me give him a chance to respond.
Well, you know, if you look at the actual papers, there's a ambulance chasing law firm that's been chasing one of our companies for 12 years. And it's a matter of fact. In those papers, it says John Catsimatidis did not do anything wrong. I have said many a times, if any of my people did anything wrong, then we should pay. And it just came down to the idea of today's case it was just a appeals court where the money was paid already. The New York Post doesn't bother to tell anybody. It was all paid for. It was just a matter if a corporate officer is responsible for corporate debts. And it's something that may go to the Supreme Court.
Well, let me give you another crack at the question I was originally getting at, which is tax incentives. What's your sense of that and how you would use them, or if you would use them?
You know, first let me say that I have helped tens of thousands of people get jobs in the city of New York. So while I may not have built a grocery store chain, I've certainly helped many people get jobs. And I've built a business from nothing when I went to Grand Central Terminal, listening to the folks that I used to feed, and they said that they wanted to work. We've done over $750 million in revenue since then, and we do $50 million a year in revenue now. So I know something about creating jobs and creating small businesses and growing it into large business. I think that targeted tax incentives are useful, but they're just like stop, question, and frisk, a tool in the quiver of a municipal government that has many things that they can.
Thank you. Let me ask you all a question. It's sort of related. When it comes to the municipal workforce, the municipal unions in particular, all of you, I think, are on the record as saying that you're not looking to pay, if elected mayor, any of the sort of back wages. I'm wondering if you're thinking, given the budget situation for the city, that municipal workers should be expected to work without increases indefinitely.
Absolutely not. There's money in the budget right now for future wage increases. I'm on the record as saying no retroactive pay. But Errol, it's a three-step process. We've talked about this publicly before, and this isn't negotiating in public. This is actually just typical common textbook labor strategy. It's a three-step process when you negotiate with the union. Number one, how long is the contract going to be? 3 or 4 years. Number two, what's the total amount of the increase? Whatever that increase is, round numbers, just call it 10% spread out over 4 or 5 years. Then the question is, how do you want to pay it? Do you want to pay it evenly over time? Do you want to pay a little bit more up front and then less over time, such that the present value is equal to the number that you all agreed on? This is the way it's done in the private sector. This is the way it's been done in the public sector before. The contracts that I negotiated part of in 1995 and 1996 here in the city of New York, or the private sector contracts that I did when I was at Madison Square Garden. That's the process that goes on. No one is entitled to retroactive pay at all, but they are entitled to a fair wage from this point going forward, and there's money in the budget to be able to do that.
Mr. Catsimatidis.
I've said publicly already that I believe Mike Bloomberg should have sat down and negotiated with these people and given them something, whether but it's hard for me to sit here and say and negotiate a future labor contract, which I won't do, because that's no mayoral hopeful or anybody should do that. My reputation is that I'm going to be fair to the taxpayer, but I want to be fair to the workers too. So you got to come up with a plan to be fair to both sides. And a comment made in the Wall Street Journal by one of the big union guys was, yes, John is tough, but he's fair.
Well, I mean, just to follow up, I mean, we've got lots of municipal workers who watch this show, who are watching this debate right now. In many cases, they haven't had a contract for several years, and in many cases, they haven't had a raise in several years.
And it's wrong. It's wrong. I've said that publicly. It's wrong. The city should have sat down with them, and they should have negotiated. Hey, if they didn't have enough money, there was always room for 0.5% or 1% just to put everything on the table.
George.
Look at it from the other point of view. It's the unions that didn't want to negotiate with the mayor because they're waiting for somebody who's a hostage of theirs. I mean, it's pretty clear not one union negotiated a contract. So I don't think to blame the mayor for it is the right approach. Now, I have said from the very beginning, and you know, the idea of negotiating in public and all of that stuff, you know, that's just a smokescreen for not telling the voters what you really want to do when you get elected. So, you know, I definitely am not looking backwards about increases. And I've said right from the very beginning that I wouldn't sign a contract, a labor union contract, that didn't include the participation of the employees in paying for their health insurance. Now, the state pays, state employees pay, federal government employees pay, people at the Doe Fund pay 20%. You know, it's an accepted practice in business and in America today that we help pay for our health insurance. It's so expensive. And I, as I said, would not sign a contract without them participating.
Okay, let us move on to the lightning round. Got some short questions. You answer them yes or no. You guys know how this goes. We've done this a couple of times now. First question, we'll just go right around the table. Have you used mass transit in the last week?
Yes.
Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Yes.
Should there be a commuter tax for workers who live outside our city?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Should there be hydrofracking in part of New York State?
Yes.
I think we should experiment. Yes.
Yes.
Do you support the mayor's ban on large sugary drinks?
No.
No.
Yes.
Okay. Would you step aside in this current campaign if Police Commissioner Ray Kelly were to decide at the last minute to run?
No.
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 All in. Okay. Have you ever ridden a city bike?
No.
No.
I'm a charter founding member.
But have you ever ridden?
No.
No. Okay. Related question. Should there be more bike lanes in our city?
No.
No.
Yes.
Okay. Has Ed Cox done a good job as state Republican chairman?
Yes and no.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you support the New York State DREAM Act?
Yes.
Yes.
I do.
Okay. Twitter question. Do you write your own tweets?
Yes.
Once in a while.
Sometimes.
Do you think public sector workers should be unionized at all?
No. I agree with Franklin Roosevelt, who thought they should never be unionized.
It seems to be a little out of control. So I would say yes, but with a little bit of controls.
Yes.
And finally, did you vote for Mitt Romney in the last presidential election?
Yes, I did.
Yes, I did.
Yes, I did.
Okay. That wasn't so bad, right?
No.
Let's talk about education, guys. If elected mayor, what educational reforms would you keep from the Bloomberg era? And where would you make a change in emphasis or go in another direction altogether? And let's start with you, Mr. McDonald.
Well, I'd like to emphasize the idea that when we start out in kindergarten, that every New York City child can have as a goal going to college. And I think that there's a wonderful program in San Francisco that we should adopt, and I will as mayor in the city of New York, called K2C. And very simply, it's every child that registers in kindergarten gets a $50 savings account that they start saving money. That's matched by, and 3 times actually, and it allows for philanthropic investment, the adoption of a school or a person or all kinds of things, so that 18 years later there's sufficient money, and we can, because this is New York City and we have all of these financial wizards, we can actually have a college fund that this money goes up into that can be invested at a greater rate than, obviously, return than a individual person could. So I'd like to keep the emphasis on higher education. I think that the Bloomberg administration has done a terrific job in advancing educational goals. I can remember the days when an assemblywoman in the Bronx was sent to jail for stealing the piano from the school and putting it in her living room. And that's what the mayor inherited, those kinds of things. Now, mayoral control is very, very important going forward. Obviously, we need to preserve the gains, but we need to improve. And I think the emphasis on parent involvement, which the savings account does, and the idea that there are these high expectations of all of our students is a good way to start.
Thank you. Mr. Katsimatidis.
I have said publicly, Earl, that we have too high of a dropout rate, and I want to help the kids, and I want to help them get a different kind of education. If they plan to drop out, I want to give them a choice and try to make them, send them to have a trade school available, to make them carpenters, electricians, plumbers, mechanics, to give them an opportunity instead of just dropping out and going out and getting an $8 an hour job, to give them the opportunity of being able to be a carpenter or electrician where they can make 50, 60, 70,000 a year. And we're not doing that now. In addition, our teachers need better training. I want to help our teachers become even better. That's very important to me. That we have great teachers, but we got to give them the training. I'm proposing what we already have on the books. Have a master teachers program where the master teachers take the new teachers and teach them how to be better for our kids. Our kids are number one, and we have to make sure that they get the right education, because right now we are failing our kids.
What John was just talking about with teacher training and teacher development is at the core of why charter schools are doing a better job than our regular public schools right now. And teacher development is a very, very important thing, and it's going to be the key to success going forward. I actually believe that if, teaching is more than just a job, it's more than just a profession, it's a calling. And if someone coming out of college wants to teach our young children how to read, how to write, how to survive in the real world, it's important for the mayor to provide them with the resources necessary, the professional development, the training, the older teachers that can teach them with peer review. Now, regarding Mike Bloomberg and what he's been able to do with mayoral control, Errol, 11 years ago, if we would know the results that we have today in reading scores and English language arts and the increases, and actually the increases in the graduation rate, while they've dropped slightly in the past year, they are significantly greater than they were 11 years ago. Mike Bloomberg should be applauded, and if we knew we could have these results with mayoral control, would have had it years ago when other mayors in the past have asked for it. So I actually think, when it comes to Mike Bloomberg, I agree, he's done a good job. We, as the next mayor of New York, and I will, as the next mayor of New York, do an even better job by working with the teachers, giving them the resources, and most importantly, teaching the kids the skills they need to be able to survive in the 21st century. Not taking a test, really going back to the knitting and learning what's really important and how to make critical decisions.
Well, you know what, let me ask a sort of a follow-up question to everyone here, which is on the specific reform of merit pay for teachers for extraordinary performance, however that's defined, whether it's linked to tests or not. I mean, I know you went to Brooklyn Tech. I think we all went to public schools, and none of us were taught by teachers who were in it for the money. Why do that? Why do merit pay?
Incentives are an important factor of life.
But they weren't for your teachers.
Well, I went to parochial school, so the incentive there was the ruler.
Right. Well, twice over. Your teachers were probably getting less than public school teachers.
But there are no nuns now. I mean, they don't teach anymore. But can I follow up on something that John said, because the education is obviously a critically important aspect of who you elect as mayor of the city of New York. John said, and if you listen to him, you know that he just said it, plan to drop out. Those students who plan to drop out. Believe me, there's nobody that entered kindergarten with a plan to drop out of school. And I don't think that that's the way that the mayor should look at the 1.1 million school children that we have in the city of New York. Sure, there are jobs, high-paying jobs for carpenters, electricians, and plumbers. And you know who gets those jobs? Not the kids that go to New York City Public School, not the kids with the complexion that they have. There's 300 carpenters' jobs a year, 400 electricians. There's hardly a job that a minority child in New York City can qualify for in those unions.
George doesn't know what he's talking about. As far as the fact that plans to drop out, I'm talking about kids in high school. They're sophomores and they can't do the work and they want to do other work. And it's intuitively obvious what I meant. I believe in helping all our kids, and I just want to work at that.
Talk to me about merit pay. Should teachers get extra money?
The situation we're in right now, and such a large turnover of teachers, we do need some master teachers to be able to put their arm around our younger teachers and say, let's do it this way, let's do it this way. In my 30 years, I found that if I did it this way, it would help. And I believe the system needs help right now to get to the point that we want to be. Otherwise, our kids are suffering. If you remember the statistic that came out a few months ago, and 81%, I believe, of the kids applying to City College weren't able to do reading, writing, and arithmetic. And it's sad.
Not at the college level, anyway.
At the college level.
Yeah.
Incentives are very important in the public sector and in the private sector, and I've talked about this for years. Competition is a very, very good thing, and giving people an incentive to do a better job is the way the entire world works. And Errol, right, you know, one of the things that you basically said is that we've never done it that way before. That's exactly what I hate about the government right now. When people say, we've never done it that way before, why should we do it now? We need to have innovative thinking in government and try to make it more efficient, more effective, so that we have these kids, not 81% of them who can't go to our community colleges because they can't read, write, and arithmetic. A mayor has got to make the changes.
I agree.
Let me ask everyone to name a reform. You don't have to go into any depth about it, but what was an educational reform that we've seen over the last 12 years that you think was a mistake, was something that either shouldn't have been tried, or now that we know the effects of it, it's not something you would want to continue if you're elected mayor?
Go ahead.
I think the interpretation of mayoral control that there really shouldn't be listening to community involvement and parent involvement. There needs to be more give and take between the parents and the communities and the principals and the supervisors and the Department of Education. There's been a lack of that communication going on, and that communication is nothing more than transparency, and that's one thing. I think the interpretation of mayoral control, I'm all for strong mayoral control, but mayoral control does not say we're not going to listen. So that's something I would change.
I agree with Joe on that. I believe somebody has to be boss. There should be mayoral control, but there should be constant communication with the parents groups and community groups, etc. It's really necessary just to keep that open. The big item that happened 30 years ago or 35 years ago, I don't remember exactly when, is when somebody decided everybody should get an academic course and everybody should go to college. It meant well, but unfortunately it didn't work. And we have to separate out the people that want to go to college, could go to college, and separate the ones that want to go into trade school, and separate the ones that want to do music and arts, because we have to be able to use the talents of all our students and develop the talents of all our students.
Let me ask you a brief follow-up. This is sort of what George McDonald was saying a couple of minutes ago. If there's a scale question, I guess is what he was getting at, is if there's only 300 or 400
and we have
union
28
slots
schools like that
are open, and you've got perhaps thousands who fall in the category that you're talking about, there's a fundamental mismatch, so that wouldn't necessarily be a solution, right?
We are not going to be able to save all the kids. But I am already talking to some of the unions about having a place for the 55 or 60-year-old union carpenters or union electricians or whatever that want to become teachers and teach our youth. And we have to work towards it, whether it's computer skills or whether it's automobile skills, aviation skills. There's a whole variety of it, and it's not one item. And it should be studied to give choices to the kids to become successful.
You know, John, we have 121 vocational schools
Yes,
now.
I know that.
And they're doing their job, and the kids that are coming out cannot get the jobs. So what I think is important is not just saying to the kids who in high school who are on their path to saying they're going to, you know, want to drop out. They have every opportunity to go to school for aviation. They have every opportunity to go to the high school in Brooklyn that teaches them the transit arts so they can learn how to repair our subway system. There are schools for plumbers. There are schools for people who want to be beauticians in the city of New York.
And I want to be
those.
able to increase it, to give them the ability to learn how to do something.
So I think the mistake is that we don't have enough charter schools. I don't think that we've advocated hard enough for this change in our educational policy. And I think that one of the things that's very important about it is to be able to fire teachers who don't perform. Also, I think one of the things that we haven't worked out yet, that we have to, is to give the chancellor the ability to fire these teachers who sexually offend or molest our children, and give them, the fired person, due process after. But not put them in a rubber room, not let them go into another classroom and teach vulnerable children. I think that that's something that we have to change, and we have to change.
I totally agree with everything he just said.
Change that immediately. And let me say,
schools.
and let me finish this, because I think that the workforce development is one of the things that we're talking about. I don't know that it's as so much education, but matching the skills of our workforce to the available workforce is a very important thing. And I believe that that can be done. I would have a deputy mayor for workforce development.
Let me thank you. Let me, in our closing 8 minutes, I want to give each of you 2 minutes, and it really won't be more than 2 minutes, to answer some of the controversial questions, some of which came up tonight. I want to give you a chance to sort of fully flesh it out so we don't leave without having done that. And well, in your case, Mr. McDonald, you have promised to create a job for every single New Yorker, which is an extraordinary promise. Do you have to be mayor to do that, or is there some other way to make zero unemployment happen?
I think you have to be mayor of the city of New York to do that, and I think that you have to want to do that. Look, over 25 years ago, Earl, I went to Grand Central Terminal, and after a woman had died of malnutrition, and I started feeding people there, and I did that for 700 nights in a row, and I listened to what they said, and they appreciated the sandwich, but what they wanted was a room and a job to pay for it. A room and a job to pay for it. So these vulnerable people that laying on the floor of a terminal wanted to work. And that's the key to success for our city.
What's unique about the mayor? How do you make?
We get to use the buying power of the city of New York. We get to have the bully pulpit. We get to do things like appoint a mayor for workforce development. We get to follow through on some great plans that people have already written that just need to be implemented. Look, this is the time when a government changes and new ideas come flooding in from all over. That's the greatest thing about this election. We're running for mayor to represent the people of the city of New York. And what do the people want? And these are the changes that the people need. We have been through a horrible recession in the city of New York. Now, that it didn't affect the people at the top, okay, that's a wonderful thing for our city. But there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people at the bottom that need work, and they need a mayor that's going to focus like a laser beam on their needs, because that's how you move people into the middle class.
Okay. I've got a question for you, and I want to follow up on something that was said, touched on a little bit earlier. This week, a federal appeals court ruled you to be personally liable for a $3.5 million settlement with employees who said that they were cheated out of overtime.
Yeah.
And that comes on top of an earlier case involving delivery men and a $1.45 million settlement that's being worked out with female employees. Should people be concerned about the quality of the jobs that you would create as mayor?
Oh, absolutely not. This says, you know, first of all, the delivery men were never our employees. AMP, Food Emporium, Dwayne Reed, and Gristides were all sued at the same time, and these people were employees of the delivery company, and since the delivery company went bankrupt, they went after the primary companies. The second case that came up, most of those people, 80% of the people, were members of the union. Those people have a representative, and their representative is in the stores all the time. They never complained. There was never a union complaint. What happens is these ambulance-chasing lawyers come into and grab the person. The case was called Torres. I think the person worked for a month or 2 months for that company, and they just create something that doesn't exist. And that's one of the problems. If you interview the unions we do business with, they'll tell you the same thing.
In the case of the delivery men, I mean, whether or not they were your employees, they were taking Gristedes goods to homes, and this was this was extraordinary stuff.
Get it straight, please. Right. You have to get it straight, because they didn't clock into our store. If there was a Dwayne Reed on this side of the street, and there was a Gristedes on this side of the street, they took some from here and some from there. There was nobody clocking them in, nobody clocking them out.
I guess my main point, though, was that these delivery men, we're talking about 70, 80 hours a week and getting paid a base rate of $75.
But we didn't do that. We're not the ones that did it. It wasn't our employees. As a matter of fact, when I took it over, you know what I did? I gave those people jobs at above minimum wage. I made them union members. I made them union members and gave them health care. And I care for my people.
Fair enough.
And that's what I did.
Yeah, but very quickly, yes, no, would you have done it without the court case?
Probably when it came to me, yes. All our members are union members.
Fair enough. Joe Lode, a question for you. As chairman of the MTA, you resigned without concluding a final labor agreement with the Transport Workers Union. Why did you leave that challenge to your successor? And what confidence can people have that you'd be able to follow through on the many labor issues that are facing the next mayor?
Well, first off, the labor agreement ended during the period of time when Lee Sander, who didn't complete it. Lee Sander left it for Jay Walder. Jay Walder left it to Joe Lode. Joe Lode left it to Tom Brendergast. That's been 6 months and there's still no contract. You want to know why? During the last 6 months while I was at the MTA, the TWU canceled negotiating meetings 19 separate times. For whatever reason, I was willing to negotiate every single day of the week, 24 hours a day, to get a contract, because the workers of the Transit Workers Union deserve the raises that are necessary, deserve to be able to feed their families. They did a phenomenal job when Superstorm Sandy was here. The reason why you can feel comfortable that I'll be able to negotiate contracts is because I've done it in the private sector and I've done it in the public sector. To negotiate, you need two willing parties. The TWU still is not ready to negotiate.
What would be the rationale in that case? I mean, we heard about other unions that were accused, I don't know if it's true or not, of trying to run out the clock on the current administration at City Hall, but that's not true for the MTA.
No, it's not true for the MTA at all. It's not the same situation that Mike Bloomberg has. Why are they doing it? Because everybody who's been at the MTA running it for the last 3 terms that they've had with different individuals are all talking about exactly what George McDonald's talking about. They need to pay for their health care. They need to pay for various different parts of what they get for their benefits. On top of that, there are numerous work rule changes that need to happen, and those are important for making sure that the system stays efficient and effective. They don't want to make any changes. All they want is a raise and keep everything else the same. That's not collective bargaining. That's just gimme, gimme, gimme. And that's why it never happened. And it got to a point where they didn't know what to do. So in 19 separate times, they said, you know what, we're not coming to the table. You can't negotiate with somebody who's not willing to come to the table.
When you say not know what to do, I mean...
I'm serious. I'm not sure that the leadership of the Transit Workers Union knows how to negotiate a contract. The president of the Transit Workers Union right now has never negotiated a contract in his life. And the reality is, I don't think he knows how to do it. He won't listen to his advisors. He won't listen to any of the attorneys that are involved. There's a roadmap to getting it done. You need to have a willing party. I was a willing party any time of the day and night. I would plead with John Samuelson. I would text him messages. It's time to get to the table.
Do your own texting too. All right, gentlemen, we are out of time. Thank you all so much for coming by tonight. Give the name of your website for those who don't know it.
McDonald2013.com, and I want your vote.
Mr. Katsimatidis.
Cats2013.com.
joelota4mayor.com, and I want your vote as well.
Okay, that is all the time we have for tonight's debate. I'd like to thank the candidates for joining us tonight, and here's a reminder. Primary day is on Tuesday, September 10th, and the general election is on November 5th. For extensive political coverage, be sure to watch The Road to City Hall on New York One News and Pura Politica on New York One Noticias. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great evening.
This has been a special presentation of New York One News and New York One Noticias. A special thanks to Time Warner Cable.